West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
So this is what Donald Trump is waking up to today. It is the second straight day that Rupert Murdoch's New York Post has taken aim at him. Trump says that he is not to blame for the midterm performance, but some high-profile Republicans, they simply don't see it that way.
Almost every one of these Trump-endorsed candidates that you see in competitive states have lost. And it's a huge loss for Trump.
I think it sends a message to the country, along with some other states, that this is truly a pivot point for the Republican Party. This is a time that Donald Trump is no doubt in the rearview mirror, and it's time to move on with the party. It's time to move on with candidate quality.
It's an opportunity to reassess what Trump's role is inside the Republican Party, and are people willing to stand up rather than caving in on him?
The question is, does the rest of the Republicans have the courage to stand up to Trump, or do they once again acquiesce to him? Because we all know him. He's not going to take the blame for this, at least in his own mind. This is certainly a rejection of the MAGA base.
I think Governor DeSantis did it incredibly well in Florida. He just knocked the cover off the ball there. And I think people are now saying, okay, we're moving forward. And if you just look at the Trump versus DeSantis stuff today, it's a heck of a lot different than it was just 3 months ago and definitely a year ago.
You know, I think Governor DeSantis is the biggest single winner of the night, and he will almost certainly become the rallying point for everybody in the Republican Party who wants to move beyond President Trump.
Let's discuss now. Senior political analyst and senior political correspondent at the New York Times, Maggie Haberman, is here. She's also the author of the book Confidence Man, The Making of Donald Trump and the Breaking of America. Good morning. I don't even have to say anything to you. Just go. Did you see what happened?
I did. What I'm most struck by in that montage that we just saw is Newt Gingrich and the Lieutenant Governor of Georgia, because Newt Gingrich is somebody who has been incredibly close to Donald Trump, has been talking up his strength forever. Lieutenant Governor of Georgia is not a voice that we hear from repeatedly. The others are generally people who have been pretty critical of Trump. We're at a real inflection point. Clearly, the elites in the party are done with Trump. We only have to look at this to know just where the elites in the GOP are. That doesn't necessarily mean it translates to the base. And so I think we are going to see. I think Trump is at his most vulnerable than he has been since January 6th, but whether somebody moves forward against him, we'll see.
When will we know and how, right? I'm not saying what month, but what indicates to you that we will know if this time is different?
Well, among other things, these races that are not settled yet have to get settled. So if Kari Lake wins for governor in Arizona, if Laxalt wins in Nevada, if Blake Masters somehow pulls it out, although at the moment that looks harder to see, whatever happens in the Senate race in Alaska, because that was a key target of his because of impeachment, that will be telling. If his candidates pull it out, then it's going to be that he had a rough night in Pennsylvania and a few other specific spots. If not, then you are looking, and look, a lot of these candidates had tougher races than they should have, given everything. We will know in the next few months if, among other things, DOJ moves forward against him? Does Ron DeSantis start making more moves than he's been doing? And DeSantis is really the one to watch, as we just heard. Trump is never going to acknowledge that something is wrong. And folks around him spent all day yesterday insisting nothing bad really happened. Something bad happened. We're just not sure what it means.
What was he saying yesterday behind the scenes? Because I know he's tweeting or he's posting on his website about he personally believes he was successful, but Republicans themselves were not on Tuesday night.
Right. It was for some people it was disappointing, but I did well was essentially his tweet. And that's also not true, by the way. Like, he did well in some places. Privately, according to multiple people I talked to, he was very angry. The focal point of his anger was the Oz race in particular, because that was not a natural fit for him, and he was convinced to do it. And of course, he never takes responsibility for any of his own decisions. It's always that some staffer tricked him. And I think, Caitlin, to your question, this is something that I heard a lot of complaining about from people around him yesterday. You know, his aides who are in his world, paid aides, are all insisting nothing's wrong, status quo, everything goes forward. Other people are saying, how many years are we going to spend blaming it on staff? And I think you were going to hear more of that as we go forward.
One big question is, does it delay his announcement? I know there have been some people, even on the record, Kayleigh McEnany, Jason Miller, saying he should wait, not do it, but wait until after December 6th, which is when that Georgia runoff is.
They all, in his world, think that he should do that. Now, how forcefully they make that case to him versus say it to each other is always the open question. But that is the key date to watch for next week. He, I think, does not want to. A bunch of people close to him also are worried it will show some sign of weakness. But he's going to get blamed if he continues to go ahead and Walker loses.
What do you make of Mike Pence out with this op-ed today? His book comes out Tuesday, same day Trump's going to make this big announcement from Mar-a-Lago. What do you make of him? As Don's been pointing out, he's selling a book. He could have said all this stuff to the public, put it on the record in the days following January 6th, and he didn't.
Or to the House Select Committee.
Yeah, there you go.
There's an alternate universe where this is his House Select Committee testimony. But that said, I think it's an important part of the historical record. I think that he and his folks have voiced issues with the Select Committee that they consider to be about process and how things were conducted. It's pretty striking, Poppy, hearing Pence talking about this in his own words. I mean, he's talking about, he confirms much of the reporting that's been out there already. So yes, there are people who are going to read this and say, well, we knew this, except we didn't know it in first person from Mike Pence. He explains why he didn't want to leave the building, and it's not because he thought that he was going to be essentially kidnapped by the Secret Service as part of a plot. It's that he didn't want the image of his caravan fleeing, his motorcade fleeing the Capitol. He confirms conversations that he had with Trump. He describes this lengthy pressure campaign. And then a really interesting moment after January 6th, in his first conversation with Trump, I think it's 5 days later, orchestrated by Trump's son-in-law and daughter, Trump has a moment where he says, what if that rally didn't happen? Then it's too terrible to end this way. That's the only time I have heard of any real reflection from Trump, and it was fascinating.
It's interesting that you read it that way with the whole motorcade leaving the Capitol, because for me, I thought, well, was this about optics for Mike Pence? Because he could have left the Capitol and still, with his dignity, and still did what he had to do, what his oath to the Constitution. But he could have also stood up faster and stronger to the former president, and it may not have gotten that far. He said, I had compassion for the people when I drove up and I saw, the people at the rally as I was on my way to the Capitol. I had compassion for them. Perhaps if he had been more honest with the former president and with those people, then it would not have gotten to that moment. So I read him staying there as, not the way that you had. I feel that this is reputation rehab for Mike Pence, this book. And I don't ascribe to the belief that Mike Pence is a hero because he did his job. We have to have higher standards than that, especially for elected officials, especially if you are the person who is second in power. You have to be able to stand up to the boss when you know that you're on the right side of history, the law is with you, and it's your oath.
So, Don, I think there are a lot of people who feel the way you do, and we've heard that criticism not just about Pence, but a number of former Trump aides. The way that I have come to look at it, looking at everything that happened, and just given the intensity of everything that was happening during that 3-month period of time, people in the administration, those of us covering it, it's sort of shocking to look back and look at how much was taking place. I am not sure. I think Pence is in a different position, so I agree with you that I think that if he had said something publicly, it might have been different. I actually am no longer convinced how much of what any one person could have done. Bill Barr did come out in December and say there was no widespread voter fraud. And Trump just rolled right over that and looked to find other people who were going to do the job. In Pence's case, if Pence said, I'm not going to do this, then they would have just proceeded without him. I wonder a lot about what would have happened at the end of the final 2 weeks had the riot not happened. Would Trump have walked out of that door willingly? There's so many unknowns. I hear what you're saying, and I think that there are people, as I said, who do feel that way. I just don't know that I think that one person saying this is going to matter.
Just if you look at, and again, he says in his book, and in this, the clip that this op-ed or whatever is basically
it's an excerpt.
It's an excerpt from his book. But when you look at what he says, when he says, I wanted to give people the opportunity to discuss legal challenges, there were no legitimate challenges to the vote. There were no legitimate challenges.
And what ended right?
So that's where people believe that he should have just cut it off there instead of giving oxygen to the election deniers in office. That's all I'm saying.
And I think it's a very valid argument. But I also understand, where he is coming from in terms of how. You can make the broader argument that this is what happens when you agree to sign up for working for Trump, right? And I think that that's sort of part of the problem. But I also, personally, as a journalist, I am interested in what the former vice president has to say.
It is Thursday, the 10th of November of 2022, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef. And our daily special is Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays, a little bit of jambalaya, a little bit of spice in your life, just a little. All right, how are you today? We are still in the throes of election season because it is not over. Nope, every ballot needs to be counted, and there's some people who don't want every vote counted. So, and we know who they are because I was checking and I haven't found a Democrat yet who said, stop the count, I'm winning. Stop the count, I'm winning. It's sort of like someone running a marathon, and as soon as they get into the lead, they go, race is over. Yeah, but you're supposed to, run the whole 24 some odd miles. And the guy goes, and there's always a guy. Maybe not, when I think of that Carrie Lake lady. Anyway, the competitor will then say, "No, it's over. The rest of this race is fake." Give me a break. You're supposed to run to the end of the line, and then you'll get timed. And then all the other people behind you have to finish too, and then they get timed. All right. Well, I guess we had to cede control of this country during the Trump years to the people who never took a civics class, even when it was required. They ducked out. They skipped school. I don't know. The dropouts, the losers, the continuation high school, the smokers out there in Marlboro country, as it was called when I was in high school. Yeah, let's go to Marlboro country. I don't smoke. I'm going over to the track. I'm going to go run. Okay, or play handball. We had a 3-wall handball court right next to to our track, and we used to play 3-wall handball quite a bit too. So anyway, that's neither here nor there, but it is quite a memory thinking how long ago it was now. Boy, we didn't have anything to worry about back then except, I don't know, dying in Vietnam. Yeah, that was hanging over our heads through, from grade school on. Hi. Okay, now they want to take the vote away from the 18-year-olds because apparently all those 18 to 21-year-olds just voted and voted and voted, and we can't have that anymore. Yeah, count every ballot. They don't want to count every ballot, and they don't want Americans voting, because when Americans vote, look what happens. They are only in this game at this moment because of extreme gerrymanders over really just around a half dozen, maybe a little bit more areas, states. Yeah, states and areas. But regardless, these extreme gerrymanders, they can only win when they game. Yeah, I ran 23 miles. Race is over. I'm in the lead. Rest of this race is fake. Okay. Well, count still goes on. And I don't know. Let's keep our fingers crossed. It's certainly not the mandate that they had expected. But has that ever stopped them before when they lacked a mandate? Jeez. Which brings us to Bush and Cheney. Looks like Biden's going to release the interview from the 9/11 Commission. I'd like to hear that. Yeah. My pet goat. All right. That'll be interesting. But we still don't know what's up with the Warren Commission report on Kennedy's assassination. And I wonder why. I don't know. Partner with the mob, you might have a problem. I guess they don't want us to know. Really? Come on. Like we don't know. They didn't want that guy. Yep, this is another thing that we have to remember because we were quite young. I was in third grade at the time, and yeah, I was a precocious kid. But I only realized the hate and racial animus and the fervor against anybody who would extend voting rights to those people. The vitriol, the calls for the death of the President of the United States on billboards all over Texas when he went to visit Dallas was, I would say, quite profound. Others would say it was all over the place. Okay. So, I don't like our politics being changed at the point of a gun or even a hammer. I don't like it. But it sure seems our side gets taken out a lot, doesn't it? And somehow we're the bad ones. Yeah, they just got in our way. This country is going to hell. We got to change it back. Yeah, change it back to what? White utopia? Because in my state of Oregon, we had a ballot measure to take out the pro-slavery language from our Constitution. And 46% of Oregonians said, nope, we want slavery in there. Because if it's not there, what are we going to... We got to rewrite it all over when we, enslave people again. Okay. Oregon was white utopia. The Constitution did state that even free men of a colorful persuasion were not allowed. All right. Though we be mostly liberal, there's a lot of white people with guns, and lots of them. Okay, and they're totally willing to set forest fires on fire to cover their poaching, and then when they get caught, take over a federal facility and say, it's for freedom. And then Trump pardons them all. All right. So, let's joke about an 82-year-old guy getting his head bashed in with a hammer. It's all about the cruelty. And yet, somehow, we are the baby eaters. I swear to God, every time I hear another GOP type in a leadership capacity getting hauled off because of, baby porn, I'm like, they are drinking the blood of babies and they're eating babies. They keep bringing that up and they keep getting hauled off. I'm going to tell you, they are what they complain about. Jeez. If they had a little bit of self-control, See, that's the whole point. I don't have any self-control, so I got to blame it on somebody else. And then they say, we do that. No, we take ownership. Well, most of us. I mean, come on. I like to think that our liberal side has a certain level of, I don't know, self-reflection that seems absent on the other side. Seems. But regardless, I like to think that, we will let our better angels take over. But our better angels will also say, stop hitting me in the face. I can only take so much. Turning the cheek. So, yeah, we are inundated with a bunch of racist Nazis in this state who are perfectly willing to take up arms and thumb their nose at government and their neighbors. Oh, you have some land adjacent to mine? Well, I'm just going to take it. Then you go to the Oath Keeper cop, the constitutional sheriff, and I don't know. Is there some sort of money involved in here? Because it sure seems like a lot of Oath Keeper constitutional sheriffs, I don't know. Something's motivating their behavior more than just an adherence to their Reader's Digest version of the Constitution. All right, well, we're still in the throes of election season, and I'm just going off. I did want to mention something that was quite sad that I found out. And I suppose maybe this is a violation of HIPAA, but I'm not selling the information. It may be deemed somewhat salacious by mentioning it. I hope that, there's enough distance so that there's a bit of privacy involved for the parties involved. But I found out some tragic and very, very sad news about our doctor. And it turned out that he was in the throes of some deep, deep, deep depression at the age of 36. And it was one of those classic or cliched type of events. His wife had left him a month or more ago, took the kids. And I guess you can surmise where this is going, but he moved his line of existence along in this plane of existence and moved on by his own hand. The thing I want to mention about this is that this is somewhat common in people who are high achievers. Let me put it this way. High achievers sometimes feel that they can figure it out themselves. That they can, let me back up a little bit. They can figure it out themselves. But also, high achievers sometimes don't have anybody to go talk to because of their own ego or whatever. Now, our doctor was a hard-working guy, and he was very, very busy taking care of everybody else, and he never took the time to take care of himself. And when there was time for himself, he couldn't stop the voices in his head. So a little bit of advice. You have to recognize when you're in that state. And then you also have to remember not to answer your own questions. It's very important. Step back. I was just thinking if you would just step back. I don't know. It just made me very, very sad. Because I found that when I was in these throes, that the mere act of work was quite therapeutic because I would focus in on that. And at some point I was finally able to deal with these other parts. In psychology, that's also called a form of avoidance. You're not really confronting the dissonance at hand. So work then exacerbates that dissonance, and I'm afraid that that is what happened here. He got so tired. And the voices in his head wouldn't stop, and he kept answering them. Okay. I'm sorry for being such a downer, but that made me quite sad when I found out, and it gave me fitful sleep last night because he was such a good guy. All right. If you have an issue, you got to talk to people. You got to be around people. You got to let us know, okay, and not by code. All right. It's okay to ask for help, no matter where you are in life. We're humans. Come on. All right, what do we have in store for you here in the Bistro Cafe as we begin this, well, fine Metro Shrimp and Grist Thursdays? Yeah, that was Maggie. I guess, she's the Trump whisperer. Well, she says he's privately very angry after the disappointing performance for Republicans in the midterm elections, and specifically the ones he picked. He's blaming everybody, even Melania. He blames everybody but himself, and then takes all the credit when he wants. On the rest of the menu, the CDC is conducting a new study to determine whether veterans were exposed to dangerously high levels of cancer-causing toxins at the now shuttered Fort Ord military base in California. A Virginia judge ordered Gingrich to testify in the Georgia election probe. Yeah, Gingrich takes out the lawsuit in his state, and his state said, nope, you got to go testify. And Twitter's new owner sold nearly $4 billion worth of Tesla shares, totaling more than $19 billion liquidated since April. After the break, we move to the chef's table where NATO announced its next leaders summit will be in Lithuania. And Holocaust survivors from around the world warned about the reemergence of antisemitism as they mark the 84th anniversary of Kristallnacht. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of that chat room link, across the page, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, is the link to our Patreon page. And become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, please, because the bills keep increasing. And we pay them. And we have found that when we pay our bills, we can fly under the radar and continue this powerhouse of resistance. You know that we do. And we are able to do that because of help from folks like you. So if you could afford, how about the cost of an espresso-type coffee drink? If you could send those funds to us once a month, we're able to pool those dollars, combine them with our own, and pay those bills, and continue this powerhouse of resistance, the little engine that could. And we have for over 11 years now, going on 12. Yikes. Anyway, thank you for your generosity, and it is truly sorely needed. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, so far you can. It hasn't totally collapsed, but you can find Netroots Radio on Twitter at Netroots Radio. Thanks, Tom, for taking care of that. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary 10 minutes before showtime on Daily Codes. That's why they're diaries. I know everybody's calling them stories now, but they're diaries. And the show notes and links is where you can find the real reportage, and I suggest you do. You can follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West, and, of course, pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. Okay. This first offering in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Save some room because there's still the chef's table. Anyway, this first offering is out of the Associated Press by Martha Mendoza, Juliet Linderman, and Jason Deeren. Federal health officials are conducting a new study to determine whether veterans once stationed at a now shuttered California military base were exposed to dangerously high levels of cancer-causing toxins. The decision by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention comes 9 months after an Associated Press investigation found that drinking water at Fort Ord contained toxic chemicals and that hundreds of veterans who lived at the Central California Coast Base in the 80s and 90s, and I knew people who did, later developed rare and terminal blood cancers. In a letter last Friday to Representative Katie Porter of California, the director of the CDC's Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, Patrick Brisa, wrote that there are sufficient data and scientific reasons for ATSDR to reevaluate health risks related to historical drinking water exposures at Fort Ord. Porter had asked for a new study in February, 2 days after the AP published its story. The agency did not immediately respond to a request seeking further details about the new study. Matthew Barakat of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. Former House Speaker Newt Gingrich must comply with a subpoena seeking his testimony in front of a special grand jury in Georgia, investigating whether then President Donald Trump and others illegally tried to influence that state's 2020 election results, a Virginia judge ruled yesterday, Wednesday. Gingrich, who lives in Northern Virginia, had argued that the federal law that normally requires states to honor out-of-state grand jury summonses should not apply in this case because the special grand jury lacks the power to indict. He also urged that the subpoena would be unnecessarily duplicative and burdensome because he has already agreed to testify in front of a congressional select committee investigating the deadly January 6 attack on the Capitol, and that his testimony in both matters would essentially be the same. But Fairfax County Circuit Judge Robert Smith sided with prosecutors who said the subpoena should be enforced. The judge said the law does not parse out a difference between regular grand juries and special grand juries, as Gingrich's lawyer argued. I think I have to read the statute as written, the judge said. Now, Gingrich's lawyer, John Burlingame, said he expects to appeal the ruling. If the appeal fails, Gingrich will be required to testify to the special grand jury on November 29th. Ortate of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Twitter's new owner and Tesla CEO Elon Musk sold nearly $4 billion worth of Tesla shares, according to regulatory filings. Musk, who bought Twitter for $44 billion, sold 19.5 million shares of the electric car company from November 4th to November 8th. He sold $7 billion of his Tesla stock in August as he worked to finance the Twitter purchase he was trying to get out of at the time. In all, Musk has sold more than $19 billion worth of Tesla stock since April, including those in Tuesday's filings, likely to fund his share of the Twitter purchase. Now, the takeover of Twitter has not been smooth, and the social media platform has seen the exodus of some big advertisers in recent weeks, including United Airlines, General Motors, REI, General Mills, and Audi. Musk acknowledged a massive drop in revenue at Twitter, which heavily relies on advertising to make money. Musk had signaled that he was done selling Tesla shares, and the revelation that those sales continue left some industry analysts exasperated. Our fear heading into the final days of the deal was that Musk was going to be forced to sell more Tesla stock to fund the disaster Twitter deal, and ultimately those fears came true, which speaks to some of the massive selling pressures on the stock of late, said Daniel Ives at Wedbush. For Musk, who multiple times over the past year has said he is done selling Tesla stock, yet again loses more credibility with investors and his loyalists in a boy who cried wolf moment. Most of Musk's wealth is tied up in shares of Tesla Inc. On Tuesday, his personal net worth dropped below $200 billion, according to Forbes, but he is still the world's richest person. All right, let's go to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
Hi, and welcome to COVID Quickly, a Scientific American podcast series. This is your fast-track update on the COVID pandemic. We bring you up to speed on the science behind the most urgent questions about the virus and the disease. We demystify the research and help you understand what it really means. I'm Tanya Lewis, one of Scientific American's senior health editors. Josh is taking the week off. Today, I'm going to talk about the triple-demic of COVID, flu, and RSV. And I'll also talk about why it's so important to get the new COVID booster shot to make sure you're fully protected. If it seems like everyone around you is getting sick lately, it's because they are. But this time, it's not just COVID making the rounds, it's also flu and a virus called RSV. COVID cases have been pretty flat lately at around 38,000 cases a day, although these are likely a vast undercount because many people are testing at home. But as we discussed last episode, the new Omicron subvariants could drive a winter surge. The variants all have mutations that make them better at getting around our immunity from vaccination or prior infection. But experts think the vaccines should still provide good protection against severe disease and death. So now's a good time to get your booster if you haven't already. But more on that later. As for flu, it all but disappeared the last couple of years during the pandemic because people were staying home, wearing masks, and social distancing. That's no longer the case. The Southern Hemisphere had a pretty bad flu season during their winter, our summer, which usually bodes poorly for the Northern Hemisphere. Flu cases in the US have already started spiking, especially in the South and in New York City. And hospitals are reporting more positive tests. This is earlier than a typical flu season, which usually peaks between December and February. It's important to get your flu shot now if you haven't yet, and you can get it at the same time as your COVID booster, or space it out by a few days if you normally get a strong reaction to either shot. But let's talk about RSV, or respiratory syncytial virus. If you've never heard of it before, you're not alone, but you've almost certainly had it. Before COVID, most children got RSV before the age of 2. It usually causes mild symptoms similar to the common cold. But in infants under 6 months old, it can sometimes be dangerous. That's because it causes inflammation in the small airways of the lungs, known as bronchiolitis. And in very young children, their airways are so small that this inflammation can make it hard to breathe. More recently, we've started to learn that adults over 65 are also at risk of severe RSV. Doctors don't typically test for it, but about 14,000 adults die from RSV every year. Not that many fewer than die from flu every year. People whose immune systems are compromised are especially at risk. Like many respiratory viruses, RSV basically disappeared during the pandemic's first year, but it came roaring back in the summer of 2021. That's because many children had not been exposed to it as infants, but were suddenly mingling and getting sick. The same thing is happening now, and hospitals are filling up with RSV. There are no approved treatments for RSV, so it's usually treated with supportive care. As far as vaccines, scientists have been working on those since the 1960s, but faced setbacks after a vaccine trial that resulted in the deaths of 2 children who got RSV after getting the vaccine. But there are now several promising vaccine candidates. Pfizer just reported that its maternal RSV vaccine, which is given during pregnancy, was more than 80% effective at preventing severe RSV in infants under 3 months. Pfizer and GSK have both announced positive results for a vaccine for adults 60 and older. At least one of these vaccines will likely be approved by the end of next year, according to Barney Graham, a former NIH scientist who has spent his career working on an RSV vaccine. The best way to protect yourself against RSV is the same as for COVID and flu. Stay home if you're sick if you can, wear a good mask, and stay in well-ventilated spaces. In the case of RSV specifically, you should also wash your hands, because you can also get it from touching surfaces. Circling back to COVID, let's not forget that we're still in a pandemic. And making sure you're up to date with your COVID booster is the best thing you can do to protect yourself from getting severely ill. At this point in the pandemic, many of the people dying of COVID are actually older people who are vaccinated but not up to date on their boosters. That doesn't mean the vaccines don't work. It's just that so many older Americans are vaccinated that a small percentage is still a big number. I talked to the FDA's Chief Medical Officer, Hilary Marston, about why the new bivalent booster shots are so important. Unlike the original boosters, the new one targets both the original strain of the virus and the Omicron BA4 and BA5 subvariants, which are related to those currently circulating. Obviously, the importance of booster shots just couldn't be greater than at this moment, as the weather is getting colder and we're all inside more, Marston told me. Everyone 5 and older is eligible for a booster shot. Experts recommend waiting at least 2 months since your last booster or 3 months since a COVID infection in order to get the best immune response. But booster uptake has been truly abysmal. Fewer than 10% of eligible Americans have gotten the new shot. And this is frustrating because we have the tools to prevent people from getting severely ill. Marston points out that healthcare workers will bear the brunt of it. They're going to be there to take care of you if you do get sick, of course, but it's just such a strain, she said. Early data on the new booster shot's efficacy is still coming out, but it looks promising, including against the new variants. The shot may not stop you from getting COVID, but it just might save your life. Now you're up to speed. Thanks for joining us. Our show is produced by Jeff Del Vicio and Tulika Bose. Come back in 2 weeks for the next episode of COVID Quickly, and check out SciAm.com for updated and in-depth COVID news.
Don't you wish your life came with a warning app?
Stop.
That dog does not want to be petted.
Just a little heads up before something bad happens.
Move your coffee cup away from your computer.
Oh, no.
So you can have more control.
Stop. You're texting your boss by mistake.
Uh-oh. Well, life doesn't always give you time to change the outcome, but prediabetes does. With early diagnosis and a few healthy changes like managing your weight, getting active, stopping smoking, and eating healthier, you can stop prediabetes before it leads to type 2 diabetes. It's easy to learn your risk. Take the 1-minute test today at doihaveprediabetes.org.
Warning, the cap is loose on that ketchup.
Ugh. Don't wait. You have the power to change the outcome. Visit doihaveprediabetes.org today. That's doihaveprediabetes.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and its prediabetes awareness partners.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. It doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
America exists today as a bizarre anomaly. We profess to be an electoral democracy, yet we are ruled by a governmental plutocracy. One especially gross example of this incongruity is the overwhelming power of big money over the people's will. By a wide margin, Americans of all political stripes want to ban the distorting force of huge electoral campaign donations by favor-seeking corporations and ultra-rich elites. Yet, nothing. National and state lawmakers take the plutocratic money and promptly bury democratic reforms that would stop the gusher of corrupt cash. An analysis of donations in this year's congressional races shows that this plutocratic perversion of our politics and government has reached absurd levels. Historian Nancy McLean and public interest advocate Frank Clemente have documented that the two main super PACs trying to put Republicans in Congress got about half of their $188 million election fund from just 27 billionaires. Also, a corporate front that backs GOP candidates, Club for Growth, got nearly $35 million from only 3 billionaires. Thanks to years of congressional stonewalling and the steady partisan stacking of our top courts with corporate ideologues, there is essentially no limits on this purchase of lawmakers. Indeed, the biggest donors are even allowed to undermine democracy in secret, not revealing their identity. Lawmakers elected with this money not only support the billionaires' special interest agenda, which the people don't want, but also are fierce opponents of any reforms to increase voter participation in our governing process, which people do want. This is Jim Hightower saying that's why, for example, efforts to guarantee every eligible American a constitutional right to vote have not moved forward in Congress, even though the great majority of people favor it.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1933. That was the day that Hormel plant workers in Austin, Minnesota began a sit-down strike. The company head, Jay Hormel, boasted that his company was a benevolent dictatorship. Workers agreed that the company was a dictatorship, but not very benevolent. The 1929 stock market crash and Great Depression hit the Hormel plant hard. Hormel implemented a plan to spread the work to keep as many workers employed as possible. Some workers called the plan Spread the Misery. There was a major reduction in the number of hours worked by each employee. Due to the policy, Hormel employees joined the ranks of the working poor. By the spring of 1933, Hormel workers were seriously discontent. Few knew much about union organizing. However, one worker, Joseph Ellis, had been involved in labor organizing in the past. When he was hired at Hormel, the company did not check into his background. Ellis was eventually made a casing room foreman. From there, he could hire and fire workers. He began hiring former meatpacking union